I'd like to introduce our speaker today, Eliza Smith. Ash was actually an alumni of UCSD until 2 months ago when she left to go take an awesome position at University of Nebraska, Lincoln, where she is now a director for this new Johnny Carson Center for Emerging Arts and Media Arts. And I'm sure she's going to tell us about this new program and all the exciting opportunities and work coming out of that. But she's an artist, a designer, and a researcher. I think this will be a very different talk than what you've heard earlier in the quarter. And so with that, I'll hand it over.
Okay, great. Can everyone hear me? Yes. First of all, I thank you for that introduction, but I'm not a director there. I'm an assistant professor. That's a big difference. And I'm going to talk about it. I'm really excited to be here today because I'm actually getting to present work that I did on this very campus. I'm an alumna of the Visual Arts MFA program, and then I became the director for Art and Technology in the Cultural Art and Technology program. And so because I'm so excited about a lot of the work that I've done here, I think I made too many slides, and so I might talk fast. And so if I do, just you can tell me to slow down because, it's okay. I get excited. Okay, so yes, I am this, as Stephen said, and I am working across thinking through strategies of performance, narrative, and speculation to frame problems, reimagine systems, and build worlds across multiple platforms. Before coming to graduate school, I was a producer, director, and writer for various film projects and TV, and I have written in various magazines and publications. As I said, I was the director for Art and Technology here in the Cultural Art and Technology program, and I was also an artist in residence for the inaugural Birch Fellowship program at Scripps Institution of Oceanography. Myself and Nan Renner, who is actually still there, got to do that together, and that was really, really amazing, and I'll talk about that more in a second. 2 months ago, crazy life change. I moved from San Diego, I moved to Nebraska to do this assistant professor job, and at this job, I am teaching everything experience design, immersive and interactive media, cinematic arts, story, sensory media, virtual production, sonic arts, and data and art. And so this is really exciting because I'm in the middle of the country and getting to work on these sorts of things. I went to school at NYU, and then I went to school here, and so I have been on these coastal places. I'm someone who grew up in Appalachia, and so this means a lot of ways to go back to a kind of rural place and think about a lot of the things I've learned in these other zones. So Silicon Prairie is a thing, and so I invite you all to come there. This is the building, and you should come and visit. I'm also setting up a research lab with some of the ideas that I'm talking about here, and so hopefully can bring people out from here, and I'm still working with people on this campus and still working on this campus in some kind of ways. So I'll talk about this at the end. My practice has always kind of been somewhere in between art and science, and design is kind of also, I speckle over that. But I also think that I'm doing a lot of work with pedagogy, curriculum design. I can't deny how much teaching and my role here as someone who built out curriculum really influenced my own research and practice, as well as curation. When an example of that is this really cool project I got to do with Michael Ano, whom some of you know, where this was one of the projects we were most excited about, and really thinking through these pipelines and networks as a design strategy. So this was 3x3, and it was an ongoing exhibition and performance series that fostered graduate and undergraduate research and mentorship. So really thinking through, I was always hearing from my undergrads that there weren't enough opportunities for artists to present their work on this campus. And so turning the hallway of the CAT program into a kind of gallery space that let our students kind of work in design of this space with a peer from a graduate program. And they were mixed from HCI to biology to literature to visual arts. And the kind of charge or manifesto that Michael and I wrote for this is the university has the potential for multi-generational undergraduates, graduates, and faculty to think beyond current learning models as the basis of human knowledge and creativity. But often it is the day-to-day bureaucratic and administrative needs of the university and its systems that forge what can and cannot be done, what is possible. We believe there aren't enough opportunities that facilitate and highlight significant interactions between graduate and undergraduate research on the UCSD campus. Sure, there's TA-student interactions and discussion section and the professor-TA-student relationships in lecture halls, but these interchanges can be limited, rife with power insecurities, and most importantly, they often do not extend beyond the classroom. But it could and should, and it often does. And so what if we frame this informal mentorship exchange that takes place all the time between grads, undergrads, and faculty, and often goes unrecognized or unnoticed? Could a culture of mentorship be cultivated? Question. What if there were even more platforms for graduate students and undergraduates to collaborate, connect, and co-learn from another's practice? Even as you can see here, Angie Jennings is paired, equivalently with Free Garcia, the undergraduate-graduate relationship mentorship, where we also published an entire series of this kind of mentorship, and really just thought about space and how to use it differently. It was really a lot of fun and something I was very proud of. So to zoom out a little bit, performance, I think, actually is the core of most of kind of how I arrange all of this worlds and research. I studied performance studies at NYU, and the performance studies model, I don't know why slide 11 wants to play here, but the performance studies model is really thinking through performance in two kinds of categories, artistic and cultural, and it uses creative practice as research. Artistic performance, such as storytelling, theater, plays, performance, and poetry, is a kind of artistic performance, whereas cultural performance might be rituals, parades, community festivals, social, professional roles, individual performance of gender, sexuality, class. And when I really start thinking about how I got into speculative design and design fiction work, I really have to think about how performance, and specifically its liveness, and the word that doesn't show up there is context, became a part of that. And then there's also just this thread of fiction, and I'm calling it fiction. I cannot downplay this. I'm using it as a tool to world build. At the core, storytelling is something I care deeply about in research. But as I was talking to a PhD student earlier today, I also have major issues with the word storytelling, right? I think it's so powerful and needed, but it so oftentimes gets conflated into advertisement, et cetera. And so maybe that's something we can talk about at the end, is just how to look for another word beyond storytelling, narrative, or are they okay, world building, et cetera. As I was making this talk, I tried to find 3 points that really got me into this zone. And so these were things I worked on for other people, but they were highly influential. This was Agora 2 down here at the bottom by Naomi LaFrance, who's a choreographer in New York City. I was working for her in New York, and she choreographed this piece in McCarran Park Pool, which was empty at the time. And over in the corner, you can see what McCarran Park Pool had looked like in 1936. It was built by Robert Moses, and it closed in 1984, sat unused until the summer of 2005, when it started being used. And right after this, in 2012, it was renovated and opened as a center for recreation and the residents of the neighborhood in Williamsburg, Greenpoint, Brooklyn. And I cannot say that one caused the other, but it's something to note and it affected me deeply at the time as I was working with her. And so in my own work here in San Diego, I'm often taking this idea of live action role play performance situated in public space. This is an example I did at Horton Plaza Mall. It was taking from Ray Bradbury's text, he wrote Aesthetics of Being Lost, which was a key collaborator in building this for the architect John Jerde. And this film slash live action role play was shot on site where authentic Earthlings were hired to work as mall mascots on a newly formed Planet X. And so in this piece, we're really thinking through labor, performance, authenticity. And now I hear it's being torn down, right? So from homeless encampment at some point into one of the world's first postmodern malls, and I don't know, it's closed. Does anybody know? It's not closed. It's closing. So then I also worked, when I was in production design. I built sets. I shopped as a teen in prop stores. I was always tasked by some director to make some prop to do something. And that, I think, also led into this zone of, as I'm wallpapering some random set and re-wallpapering, I start thinking about this idea of world building and how you can build worlds without characters or without an actor activating the space, but then how objects, our places, our things might be able to do it. And that's a still from Sleepwalkers, which I worked on at the Museum of Modern Art. And I was tasked with things like, go find a random taxi cab hood so that Donald Sutherland can tap dance on it. And it taught me a lot, and really shaped this idea of world building. Okay, then there was this moment in grad school where I came across this narrative networks from DARPA, which is the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. And in this, there's so many things it says, let's see. Some of the highlights are questions around narrative. Does it have strategic implications for defense missions? DARPA launched the Narrative Networks program to understand how narratives influence human cognition and behavior. It goes on. It consolidates memory, shapes emotion, cues heuristics and biases and judgment, and influences group distinctions. And so this really influenced my thesis that I made here, and really thinking through. I kind of became obsessed with trying to get accepted into this program. It didn't happen. And then, this work shows up a little later on when I created Candy Ego and made a narrative weapons lab. We can just look at this together. And so, the art and science of pretend, which is so much of what I'm interested in terms of simulation and real-world implications. And here we have Jordan Peele, the author, director, writer, who's ventriloquizing a deep fake of Obama, and in a piece which he's trying to point to and make aware this notion of deep fakes and misinformation. And so I put this up here because I at the same time, I'm very aware of the kind of climate that we're living in, and just of how fiction and reality can blur in very negative ways. But it can also blur in, I think, pretty amazing ways. And that's where I'm interested in working. And this is just a little this where fiction and design comes together. This is a page from Ellen Lupton's book, Design as Storytelling, and kind of explaining the theater of McDonald's versus the theater of Chipotle, and putting over this kind of hero's journey, which some people hate, some people love, and thinking about this way that we can, think about experience design and story as these kind of overarching places. And this example gets used a lot, but Doug Dietz, but I think there's a mixed audience in here in terms of your backgrounds and where you're coming from. But Doug Dietz was a industrial designer who, was creating MRI machines and decided to focus on the experience. So he and his team transformed this MRI machine into a kid's adventure story, with the patient starring in the lead role, kind of taking that same model of that Chipotle and McDonald's experience I was just leading you through. And they also created a script for the technician to lead their patients through the adventure. And so some of the prototypes included a pirate ship, a captain's wheel, surrounding the opening of the chamber. It made the area feel less claustrophobic. And with these new designs and others, the patients needed sedation less, and they were happier. They reported being happier overall. And the hospitals were happier. And he even had someone who went through that said, "Oh, can we come back tomorrow, Mother?" which is kind of one of its greatest successes. But this notion of Doug Dietz making this MRI machine into this kind of story is something I immediately think of from work I do with games and play, where I think about the role of mimicry in games and play. And so this is a slide. Actually, these are slides of slides. This is Hirokazu Yasuhara, who is the game designer for Sonic the Hedgehog. And he's actually just taking Roger Kawa's 4 forms of play and thinking through them in terms of a slide. But I can't help but notice the similarity to the MRI machine. So in this slide it says, which are the two kinds of, there are 2 kinds of slides in a park, which would you like to play with? The ordinary pipe slide or the elephant slide? And everyone says the elephant slide. You can pretend you're in a savannah, you could be at the zoo, and then kind of taking that further into other elements of design, which vertigo being increasing the height, making you feel uncontrolled, having the hills and the loops, and then chance adding that element of the water kind of splashing at you, and then adding that last element of competition, which is, doing it with someone else. And so those of you, I know there's a speculative design program here, but those of you who are not familiar with speculative design, in that book, Anthony Dunn and Fiona Raby discuss how this form of speculative design thrives on imagination and aims to open up new perspectives on what are sometimes called wicked problems, to create spaces for discussion and debate about alternative ways of being, and to inspire and encourage people's imaginations to flow freely. Design speculations can act as a catalyst for collectively redefining our relationship to reality. And I bring up this kind of cone that's actually, I have to show you something. So this is the cone of the future, right? And it's been in use for some time. But then last night when I flew here, there's this really great Twitter thing going on where it's a backlash against the future cone, nearly 16 years old. And then someone says, no, it's not 16 years old. It was in 1990, and so it's all being kind of played out here. But as you can see, people are saying, well, we want it to go back and forth, and no, it's fine. Should there be cyclical movements into the forefront, et cetera? So kind of all of these arguments going on around, futures, speculative design, et cetera, right now, which I think are kind of interesting, happening live. You can tune in. And then this also gets used a lot in speculative design, right? So this hype cycle for emerging technologies, and looking at, what is emerging and thinking about ways to kind of extrapolate out from that and use it. And critique it or question it, et cetera, in the kind of design work you're doing. But I recently, last week, found myself in a psychology lab on the campus that I'm now on, and they're using VR to an emerging tech, which I think is not at the peak. I don't think it's at the peak of innovation right now, but they're using VR to play out scenarios to see when a bystander might step into sexual aggression behavior, and using kind of 4 scenarios to play that out. And so I went in and I did the entire thing. This is not a still of that. But I did it last week, and I went through the whole thing and I finished it, and I have to say, I was, at the end, the researchers who've gotten a lot of funding to do this, I was like, why VR? Like, why are you using VR? It doesn't make me feel like I'm really in a party and that I'm really intervening in a sexual assault. And this question, she was kind of struck by, because she said, well, before we had this bar lab across the street, and they still have it, where they actually take people in and get them drunk and then do the same kinds of tests. And my slide's not coming up. It's basically alcohol. And so I said to her, I was like, I'm having so much problems right now as I'm thinking about immersion, why VR is more immersive than just the kind of live immersion. And she said, well, we can study, with more, it can be more of a model if we use VR, right? People aren't going to go off script. I mean, problem with any kind of performances is it's hard to pin down multiple times that you do it. So I thought that was really interesting and something that I'm thinking about a lot. A couple years ago, there was this Guardian article that was written, Can Live Action Roleplay, LARPing, Save the World? And I worked with some people in this class on a simulation class last spring quarter, and really thinking that people make really wild, amazing LARPs and all kinds of simulations. This question of can live role play save the world? There's even a school in Denmark that's using immersive learning games through live role play. And just to kind of quote a little bit of that article, he says, the more I study LARP and the learning sciences together, the more I become convinced that LARPs can hold immense educational potential. And learning through role play is not a modern phenomenon, he stresses. Since the 1930s, social psychologists have been aware that the more open to new ideas and willing to give ideas that may seem irrelevant or even contrary to our own beliefs fair consideration, if we are asked to take on the role of a person holding such beliefs. Now, that's what the researcher in psychology would say I am doing when I put on VR goggles and I'm at the party. But it's a question. I mean, I would love to discuss this because I was telling y'all today at lunch that I immediately, when I knew I was in VR, I wanted to kind of mess with it, or I wanted to not do the score or the script that I know that they wanted me to do when they prompted me with questions. So, and then, when I told the researcher about the article, Can Role Play Save the World, she told me that there's some other article that says VR makes role play dead for psychologists. Do you know this article? So I thought it was funny, and another good reason to talk to people in other disciplines. So another way that we use fiction is in science and tech. And as many of you know, many of the science fiction stories that we find ourselves drawn to are actually creating inventions themselves. Minority Report gets quoted a lot as having over, 90, 100 patents that are still out pending on technology that was created for that film. Also thinking about Robert Wong's work at Google Creative Labs, where they are often creating short advertisements and scenarios for technology that they then go and, an engineer sees it, the faux advertisement that they build and says, hey, we could build that, and then creates that kind of innovation out of that space. And so I have been able to play around a little bit with that with people here. And this example, I love to use this example when I'm teaching speculative design. This is Tobias Ravel's piece, New Mumbai. It's a near future where the collective drive and expertise of the refugees living in Mumbai in the near future managed to turn these genetically engineered fungal samples into a new type of infrastructure, providing heat, light, and building material for the refugees. The neighborhood rapidly evolved into its own microeconomy based around these mushrooms, and this piece is using the documentary form to tell the story of some of the characters involved in this and the rest of the world, how it became about. And here I was on a team with Stephanie Sherman, Sasha Polflep, and Colleen Immenegger to think about speculative design in relationship to micromobility and in-transit futures with the Design Lab and Hyundai. And that was a really cool experiment in kind of crossing some of what many of you in here who are doing HCD and those people that are doing speculative design and kind of blending those worlds. And here's just some these were a few slides I just pulled from the presentation that Colleen actually gave, and thinking through power fleets specifically are the slides I just pulled out. And so automated mobility and more ecological solutions, enabling vehicles to house and facilitate services and resources that were once static infrastructures. And here's some of the examples that we kind of came up with as ways that we could have picture, imagine, extrapolate these working. So last year I got a Rural Futures grant to go back to where I grew up in Appalachia to work on a project that I became kind of deep dove into around specifically data, and I called it Southern Devices, which also is the name of the factory that my dad worked at as a kid. But the project was really looking at data centers, specifically 3 of the largest in the United States that surrounded the town I grew up in. This is the Apple iCloud, which coincidentally is the only one that uses solar power. And then there was Google, and then there's Facebook. And so I think I have a map here. Of course, the map's not going to come up. Well, there's a map that shows a triangle around the town I grew up in North Carolina and these 3 data farms. And so, you know, this project is really thinking about patterns of extraction. So I'm looking at the data farms now, but then thinking through, you know, textiles, et cetera, furniture. And as I went there for the data centers, and as I started poking around, I started realizing that there's this whole other thing going on there too, which is the highest grade silica quartz that's in all of our devices, our phones. Everything is also mined up the road at Spruce Pine. And down the other road, there is one of the largest lithium future mines, where lithium is being mined to fuel autonomous vehicles. Look at Colleen. You know, our other kinds of batteries that we're using in devices, et cetera. And so I start seeing this whole kind of circle happening. And then the interesting thing was, so hold that there, at the same time I was working with the Design Lab, Mel and Eli, to do a video on cancer care and broadband in Kentucky, Appalachia. And so part of the issue that they were dealing with there is that there wasn't broadband in Appalachia, in that part of Appalachia. Well, that's not dissimilar from this part of Appalachia, where you have all of the data farms and you have all of the mining going on, but then there is actually not the broadband. Okay, so all of that research and it's in development, and I'm creating a kind of mixed reality experience out of it with kind of projects that I did with people living there in that community, talking about the cloud and data and data bodies. All of that now is kind of getting kind of channeled into this show that I'm doing at Cal IT2 with Robert Tume and Stephanie Sherman that opens in January. And we're really thinking through streaming and the physical internet, so that kind of becomes not just an art show that's showing streaming work. We are showing streaming work, and we're actually using a lot of kind of webcams that are streaming all the time here on campus, like the Plankton Cam, the Surf Cam, et cetera. But we are also, let's see, I'll just read you the line of the show. We're exploring the dynamics of online culture streams and carbon consumption, proposing alternative loops for channeling digital flows and materializing data impacts. And so one of the things that we're doing, we're kind of using this to do some design research and prototype two different things. One is we're working with designers to generate prototypical loops between streaming's carbon output via functional or aesthetic manifestations. So someone is creating a carbon-based cryptocurrency that could be calculated or reinvested live, and using real-world triggers to infrastructure caused by the streaming outputs, as well as working with John Graham and some of the people who do a lot of the, and this actually might be something, that last photo was something from John Graham's computer, to do metric visualization, sonifications, and calculations of carbon data output. So, I was just talking to Stephen, it gets really abstract, and there's been people that have made carbon analyzers. This is not a new thing, but really, we're gonna try to offset the entire streaming show. That we are also live streaming, and it's funny because artists are like, but aren't I contributing to the problem by being in this show? And it's like, yes, but we need you because we need to do the loop. We need to show the loop if we're going to do the loop. So so that's happening in January and is exciting. But working in emerging media arts, students are super abstracted from the fact that nature and the environment, or nature and technology, and thinking about things like the physical internet. And so it's something that's been really important in my own work, is making this connection. This is a still from when I was at Birch Aquarium as the fellow there. And I got to kind of lead a R&D lab. And this is another place I got to learn a lot from Nan Renner, who is coming from the design lab and human-centered design, and I'm coming from this more speculative place, but we did a lot of work together and kind of met in the middle and did a lot of crossover, thinking about these zones. This was one of the projects I was really excited about when I was there. The turtle that was in the aquarium got its first 3D printed prosthetic shell. And we were working with students a lot, live at sea. And then I got to do an ideas piece where we took the data from and created a sonic experience, but the sonic experience is really coming through your body laying on this thing that had these subwoofers underneath it to experience it. The ice melting. We took data from one day, from the same hour, and tried to place it over the same hour that we were doing this ice vibration so that it would link up time-wise. And so I've already mentioned pedagogy and course design a bit. But this project, Edgeland Futurism, I did here while I was in Southern California. I'm not sure if anybody's here that participated in this. I did it with the Arthur C. Clarke Center for Human Imagination. And there was this really great granting organization around that's no longer here called the University of California Institute for Research in the Arts. They supported so many projects for MFA students that wanted to do research with pedagogy, and it was really, really cool, and it's too bad that they're no longer around. But in this course, we asked the participants to reimagine the near future of the Southern California Borderland region and encourage them to do collaborations. And so we used speculative fiction, surrealist ethnography, situationism, and I co-taught this with Pepe Rojo, who is now getting his PhD in communication, but was living and he still lives in Tijuana. And I think I have some video to show you, but we were really considering this notion that we're all in this kind of place called Biotech Beach, and so students here really started kind of picking apart these layers and thinking about the academic, military, industrial triangle that's happening here on this campus, and really thinking through that, but then simultaneously, this is a book, this is from Sun, I can't remember, Mike Davis book, it's The Site of San Diego Tourists Never See. Income distribution map being on the left, military bases on the right, and students kind of got really obsessed because we were working with the students at UABC in Tijuana, but how it kind of just stops right there at Tijuana, right? Hard line. So one of the things we did, the first thing we did with them, not going to Tijuana, and we actually took them here, we took them here to the pictures on the right, which is right here in our very own edge city that we have here, which is UTC, right? All completely privately owned by the Irvine Group. And that's a photo of, I just told my students it's easier to get forgiveness than permission, and lots of things happened, but this is a student really pushing it in the fountain and very quickly got pulled out by the police. I'm going to show a little clip of this just because I think a lot of really cool things happen from this. Oh, I forgot to mention another stakeholder, High Tech High. High schoolers from High Tech High. So we had High Tech High students, we had students here at UCSD and students in Tijuana, and so it was this really nice kind of situation.
This could work also. Right. Yeah. All right.
Ash and Pepe, they are co-teaching the UCSD class called Edgeland Futurism. That's obviously the class we're collaborating with. And our filmmaker and guide today is Chuck.
Hello.
He's going to take us on a driving and then brief walking tour.
The territory that we're in has been kind of theorized as like an edge city, and that is because of its kind of relationship to downtown San Diego, right? We're about 12 or 14 miles north of downtown San Diego. What we're going to do is actually try to spend some time and try to walk through and experience with our body kind of what this place is. This kind of city is our...
Okay, and then I'm just going to skip forward a little bit to just show you this kind of process. So then we go down to Tijuana and worked with Casa de las Ideas to do a workshop. So just noting there that all the students, high schoolers, and not went to both sides of the border, and this part is really excruciating for anyone that's done that walk on the U.S. side, because you can't just pull up to it and park like you can on the Mexico side. So doing that walk together really early one morning, and then here's just we did at Space for Art downtown. We did the show.
Science fiction films you've ever seen.
And we had Nalo Hopkinson, who's a science fiction author, come in and kind of give a talk and talk about the students' projects, and there's a little bit of a clip of that. Whose work we also read in the class.
Each word alphabetically, and then when you put in a word, it sorts that alphabetically, and then it looks for other words that have that same sorted alphabet.
Think of even of the worst science fiction films you've ever seen. And you'll be able to see some of what they're getting at. And they say things like, you used to think I was your inferior, but you have another thing coming. You used to think you owned me, but you have another thing coming. You used to think my country was your playground, but you have another thing coming. You used to think I was your creature. You used to think I was a machine. You used to think you were the center of everything. You used to think you ruled the world. You used to think I was less than human, but you have another thing coming.
Make sure you make an appointment for speech, read.
And that is what I see a lot of this work doing. It's challenging what we are taught to think of as what we can expect, what we're taught to think of as the right way to do things. Seeing people who are not trained in the discipline and taking the courage and the right to move into it and express themselves in that discipline will literally bring tears to my eyes.
So is this your idea?
Okay. And so that course was made up of the really great thing about working in the CAT program is that I was able to work with cross-disciplinary students. You had urban studies students mixed in with bioengineers, mixed in with artists, and that was really, really great. So I'm almost at the end here. Sorry for all my technical difficulties. But what really came out of that, wrong slideshow. What really came out of that is students really questioning this idea, is thinking about the future a privilege or a right. Thoughts like, is the future already colonized? Who gets to think about the future? And really important kinds of conversations around futures building that I'm happy that we got to have. The last project I'm going to talk about and just really touch on briefly is from that came Candy Ego, really thinking about this place and space and through technology in the body and emerging tech in the body. And it was a kind of episodic series that I got to do a lot of world building and writing to kind of think through a lot of what I thought through in grad school. So the benefit of staying around in the place after you finish school is proved to be, for me, very fruitful. So this is Biofutura, thinking about the place as character. And I'm just showing you some of the storyboards here and influences as we started creating this work. And created a plant lab where plant technology, you could interact with it and sing to it. In this case, Ellie Mermond, the performer, had a neural net on her head. And so this actually became a standalone performance piece where she was interacting with the plant as she sang, and it would, be affected by the vibrations in her voice. A Zumba lab where just thinking through the ideas of sweat harvesting. The narrative weapons lab, which I've told you a little bit about. Interestingly enough, a lot of the people that were kind of acting in these roles were, like in this case, poets, right? And so the fear, poetry as coded as a potential weapon. And it's just kind of like showing you some again, mood boards, storyboards for creating these prototypes and world building. You can see some of the influences coming from different movies and, cultural trends like the day where you wear a mask to work so that you don't have to show any emotion to your coworkers is this thing that I think I really wish we would all adopt and have a day of that. It would be so nice to not have to show any emotion or to be able to do that with a talk. Created a mixed reality lab, but used that kind of soft texture that was more porous. And I guess this is just some models of how that kind of work came about. So like doing research and finding out about this soundbite hearing system and then creating a kind of, that would actually sound that's, conducted through the bone, but then creating in the world this device that instead of using our phones or glasses, we could imagine it being transported through our teeth and all of the system in our ear, right? So it's acting as this transducer up to here. And so what does that look like? And so worked with that. I use this word biogeochemical a lot, but this was really thinking about how to get more biogeochemical with the speculative designs. And we thought a lot through human interfaces, human-computer interaction, the future of gestures, etc. And the last thing I'm going to talk about is this new research lab I'm making, and it's the 3 kind of zones of research at UNL are water, power, and food, which are things I'm so excited to work in. And thinking about how to create this kind of speculative, unruly futures program there. And part of what I'm really excited about is ag tech actually is like a huge thing. And something that I know nothing about, but I'm learning in the 2 months I've been there, how it's being used by farmers all over the world to think about growing food and water and energy, et cetera. So I would love any questions you have, feedback you have, what to do in this lab, what to not do in this lab, suggestions, et cetera. Thank you for listening to me.